did record the previous one on the 22nd of August, and if you did want to go back and refresh your memory, or you weren't able to make it, you wanted to go and see that one, it is up on the Trellis website, and hopefully someone could just pop the link to that into the chat for anybody that needs it. But don't worry, we're going to give a brief recap at the start of the day. Emma's going to just quickly run through for you some of the bits that she and Christina talked about last time in terms of the Professional Services Authority and the standards that are informing all the work that we're doing. I wanted to thank everybody, not only who was on that call last time, but who's come forward subsequently and put themselves forward to be a volunteer. We're keeping a long list of those. It's all coming together. We're sort of still working through what the best order to do the work in is, so that we can do things in a logical way, and then we can get your inputs in the most constructive way. So if you've not heard back from us, it's not because we don't want you to volunteer, it's just that we haven't got to the point of saying, here's a piece of work, can you please help us with it? One of the bits of work that we have been moving on with is the frequently asked questions. So as we've been going through these meetings, we've been keeping notes of the sorts of things that people are asking us about or asking in subsequent emails. And we're trying to put together a bit of an FAQ that can also sit on the web page that people can access when they need. So we've nearly got that together. We're going to be asking a few volunteers to have a quick read through to make sure it makes sense to people who aren't in the detail, because sometimes you just get too close to something to be able to explain it clearly to people. And then we'll get that up on the Trellis website, and we'll let you know where to find that. And we're going to continue to add to that FAQ. So if there's some key bits coming out of today, we'll get those added in due course. Just a couple of other bits of sort of information and news for you before we get started properly. Last time I talked briefly about where a professional association fits into sort of the wider systems change that we need so that we can get more people being able to access STH. So just to update on a couple of bits related to that. World Therapeutic Horticulture Day, which Fiona talked about last time, is going to take place on the 15th of May next year, 15th of May 2024, put it in your diaries. Fiona and a team of people are busy working on the plans for that. And one of the things that they've asked us to do is to fill out a questionnaire. And again, we can put the link to that in the chat. A very short questionnaire just to find out how many people are interested in taking part in World Therapeutic Horticulture Day and where in the world they are, so that we can create a world map of where all the interest and activity are going into that. So if we get that link put in the chat, if people can, it only takes 2 minutes, 3 minutes, depends how quickly you can type your name and tick a yes box, basically. And then the other bit of work to bring to your attention is, I mentioned the Therapeutic Horticulture Stakeholder Group, which is set up by Natural England, and I've been sharing. Fiona's also on the group. We've been working on a paper that describes how we can use therapeutic gardening for different levels of mental health. And that paper is now out for consultation. That will not take 2 or 3 minutes because it is quite a long read, and you need to get yourself a cup of tea or a glass of wine and sit down and have a read of it. But if you can find the time to do that, we would really love to get your feedback on that. Does it make sense to you? Is there information missing? How can we make it better? Because that's a document that we want to start to use to really build understanding about STH around a much wider audience, and particularly into the healthcare audience. So we'll get the link to that on the chat. If you don't pick it up off the chat, you can go to the Thrive website, and there is now a page for the Therapeutic Horticulture Stakeholder Group, and there's a link from there to the document and a survey monkey for your feedback. So those are the bits I just wanted to update you on, that there's quite a lot of work going on around and about all of this, as well as all of the work that's happening to actually bring this professional association into being. So tonight we are going to focus on the work that Christina particularly and others have been working on around a code of ethics, because that's quite an essential part of the professional association and what it needs. So Christina's going to take us through some of what is needed and crucially why it's needed. We're then going to go into some breakout rooms and probably try small groups of sort of 5 and 6, or maybe 4 or 5 people, just depending on how the numbers work out with the groups. so that you get a chance, in some smaller groups, to have a look at some of the sections of what could be in the Code of Ethics. Have a look at the wording and how things are expressed and what you think it might mean. And then we really want to get your feedback from those groups so that we can start to use your feedback to shape what the rest of the document might look like. But before Christina gets started and gets into the meat of all of that for us, Emma's going to do, I hope, where are you, Emma? On my screen, you're up there. Just a quick recap of the Professional Standards Authority standards and their requirements. Over to you, Emma.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Catherine. So, yeah, as Catherine said, I'm going to be talking a bit about the Professional Standards Authority tonight. I'm only going to talk for about 5 minutes because a lot of you will have seen some of this information before, and it's also included in the recording that we took of the last session. I have included a little bit more information here just to help people understand the Professional Standards Authority a little bit more and what the register might look like. So I think we'll just get started then. Thanks. I should also have said, because there'll be people here who don't know me, I'm Emma Martindale and I'm the Training and Standards Officer at Trellis, part-time, and I also work in this area the rest of the time. So nice to meet any of you who I haven't met before. So, the Professional Standards Authority. So we talked about this last time, but just as a little summary, the Professional Standards Authority is it's an independent organisation, but it is accountable to the UK Parliament and was set up to run that way. And their role is to help organisations that aren't required to have a legal register to set up a register of practitioners. So this is a way of allowing other people who don't work in other well-known health and social care roles, so doctors, nurses, social workers, and many others that are already covered, to set up an accredited register. And it allows that register to be public and to be assessed by the PSA, so that hopefully that increases kind of public and professional confidence in the professions that now have a register. So that's why we're aiming for the PSA to agree with us on that and to accept the application that we hope to put into them. I've included the Professional Standards Authority website there in purple over at the side. If you go to their website, right on their front page, they have a little video that you can watch. It's quite short that summarises them. So if anyone wants to know more about the PSA, they can do that. And I'm always happy for people to get in touch as well. So next slide, please. Christina shared this slide last time, but I like it, and it just gives a summary of lots of the different organisations that already have. Oh, thanks, whoever that was. Thank you for muting, and thanks for joining us. So these are lots of other organisations that have already gone through this process of applying to the PSA and who now have an accredited register. So it helps you to see all the different kinds of organisations and professionals that are out there. And the PSA website allows you to have a look and see who has applied to start going through the process like we are. So it's quite an interesting one to look at. You can also look at all the registers of these different organisations. So that's really helpful for us to compare and contrast when we're thinking about our own register. Okay. And this slide is from the PSA website. It just shows their process. So these are the steps that we have to go through and the things that they will do when they're looking at us as a register, or the association, I guess, as a holding the register. So at the moment, we have done steps 1 and 2. We've checked their guidance. We think that it makes sense for us. We've talked to people about that. We've consulted with you all. and we've talked to a person who works for the PSA, and the staff there would support us through the completing of an application. So we're now at step 3, where we have started to work through an application form. There are 2 options at that point. You can either complete an application form just to cover one of their standards, or lots of the others, and I'll cover that in the next slides. And then the PSA then work through these next steps to decide whether they want to accredit or register. So they consult with the public, do an assessment. They would look at all of the associations, different policies and procedures, the website, how we consult, all of those things, make a decision, and they would then announce that decision. And so this slide covers what's called the first standard, which is eligibility and public interest. So if we went down the route of applying for just the first standard to begin with, it's a smaller application, then these are the kinds of things we would have to cover. So in this first standard, they want to know most about the organisation that's applying, about the roles that would be registered, and the kinds of risks and benefits that those roles might pose or provide to the public and to others. And then they also want to know about some of the processes that would be in place. It's about a 20-page application form, and there's lots of supporting documents you have to include. So that's the kind of thing that we're starting to work on at the moment. And then this next slide covers the other standards that if you're doing a full application, you have to then go into a lot more detail around all of these other standards. I won't read them out because we have included this slide before, and it'll be there in the recording if people want to have a look back and see what the other standards are that the PSA would be looking at. I wanted to include this here just to let people see what the costs are. So to apply just for standard 1, the cost is £1,352, very specific. And if they accepted our standard 1 application, they would then deduct that from a full application. So that would be us applying for all the standards. And you can see it's quite a lot more. It's just over £14,000. So it's a big amount of money, and that's why we are having to keep funding for this work kind of at the forefront of our minds. And we, as Trellis and Thrive, carry on looking for funding, and it's a kind of potentially tricky area of work to fund, but it doesn't mean there aren't funds out there. So please, if you see anything, do let us know, and we'll be looking ourselves as well. And then finally, this was a slide that Christina included last time as well, but it just lets you know how it might look were we to get to the point of having this accredited register. Well, when we do, I should be positive. So it would include practitioners' names, and this would be available to the public so people could search, or maybe another professional, you know, like a GP or someone might want to make a referral, or another profession. And it would let people see where different practitioners are located, what kind of work they're doing, and potentially other information. So this is something, again, that we would be consulting you on before it's decided. It's just to give you an idea of the sorts of things that might be included from looking at other registers. So I think that's me. If people do have questions about that, it's a very whistle-stop tour. Please do pop them in the chat, or get in touch with me. You should have my email address, but I'll put that in the chat as well. And I'll now hand over to Christina.
Thanks, Emma. And thanks, Ben, for doing the slides. Hi, everybody. I'm Christina. I live and work in Reading. I did the diploma with Thrive back in 2014, 2015. And it's lovely to see some colleagues from that course on the call this evening. Amongst other things, I now run a local network of green care providers, some of whom offer STH. This section of this evening is about a draft code of ethics with the emphasis on the word draft. Next slide, please, Ben. This slide isn't new. Again, if you were at our session in August, you'll have seen it, the strategic aims of the association. And I wanted just to highlight one part of one aim, because this is where the code of ethics fits in. It's about setting and upholding professional standards. Registrants, which is the very unlovely word for practitioners who sign up to the register and members of the new body, will be expected to sign up to the code initially and when registration or membership is renewed. Next slide, please, Ben. And again, this slide isn't new. It shows the work to be done. That's not quite the slide I had, but never mind. There's a grey box which should be there. Here we are. Great. Thank you. It's zoomed in. No, that's fine. This code is part of that grey box. Agree standards of ethical behaviour, not just lay them out, send them out, agree them. Consultation matters because it needs to be a code which we're all happy to endorse and sign up to. Next slide, please. So about this draft, which several people have worked on, it is, as I say, an essential element of professional standards, but it's not the whole picture because, of course, it sits alongside other elements such as standards of practice. The standards of practice, which is not the same as the PSA standards, they've used that word for different aspects of their application process. Standards of practice would be more about how we do things, the nitty-gritty sense. The code is more about the principles behind what we do and how we do it. We have looked at examples from other bodies, of course. Code needs to say all that it needs to say, but no more than it needs to say, which is an awful lot easier said than done. And very importantly, it needs to work for all practitioners. So as well as setting high professional standards, it needs to be something that we know we can live up to and want to live up to. Next slide, please. I've been using grey boxes, and this can all seem rather dry and word-based when we'd really all rather be engaging with plants and people. So I've put this picture in to remind myself and everybody that it's not just about ticking boxes for professional registration. It's about being trustworthy and trusted in the professional job that gives so much value and satisfaction. Probably back to the grey boxes now. Next slide, please. Yeah. Consultation. As well as this session, please do put stuff in the chat as we go along. We do welcome the Office of Help from Volunteers, like the people who've come forward already. And if by the end of today's session you think, wow, this is just so interesting, this is an area that I would really like to contribute to, then please do email Emma or Fiona or Catherine, and they'll be delighted to hear from you. In due course, the whole draft will be made available on a website, and there'll be a way of responding to it. Next slide, please. First consultation question. Who's it for? What style should we put this in? It could be in the third person, members must, which is how it's currently written. It could be in the third person we form, we will, which makes it more like a promise. It could be in the first person I will, because individuals will be signing up to it. Or it could be in the you form, you will, which makes it read a little bit more like an instruction or a reminder. Now, we were going to have a poll at this point, but the gremlins have entered and a poll is not going to be possible, I believe. So if you have a view on this, please put it in the chat, make it succinct, and that'll make it easier for us to go through the chat. You could just put members must, or we will, or I will, you must, whichever one you think it is that you prefer. And then we can begin to collate those. This evening's thing obviously isn't definitive, but it's really nice to get a feel for what people think. As I say, the draft currently is in the members must form, but don't read anything into that. Just wait a couple of seconds while people are putting their views in. Quite a lot of we's getting popular there, which doesn't surprise me. That's really good. Thank you. Keep going. Could I have the next slide, please, just while people are putting their responses in there. Okay. The structure of the draft code is fairly standard. It's got main sections or headings with subsections and a glossary. That will be something we build as we go. As we come across words which need definition or clarification, then they get added to the glossary. And I think that's something which is particularly useful for consultees to highlight, because it's so easy to assume that we know what we mean, and to find that, well, actually, that's a bit jargony, and that's not how everybody understands that word. So good to have definitions in the glossary. Next slide, please. So the layout is like this at the moment. Got the number of the section way over on the left, obviously, then the main section heading. If there are subsections within that, then that would be mentioned in the next column, and then the draft wording. This particular one here is about whistleblowing, which we won't be going into this evening, but obviously there is going to be some kind of clause on whistleblowing. Next slide, please. The main headings, the main section headings, there are 11 of them, 5 listed here: general principles, professional competence and accountability, confidentiality and data protection, the client relationship, minors. Next slide, please. Interprofessional relationships, whistleblowing, as you just saw, financial arrangements, publications and research, advertising, and insurance, everybody's favorite. Some are more complicated than others. For example, I don't imagine that the section on advertising is going to be very contentious, because it's going to say things to the effect of, members mustn't claim things which aren't true, but others are more complex. Next slide, please. So to give a bit more context to the whole thing, I thought we'd take a short look at the general principles, and there's 4 at the moment: the overriding principle, the duty of candor, inclusivity, diversity and equality, and respect for autonomy. Next slide, please. Just going to look a little bit more closely at the first of those, the overriding principle. This is the cornerstone, if you like. For medics, of course, it's do no harm. For STH practitioners, it could be acting in the best interests of the client. This can be stated in that general wording form, acting in the best interests of the client. That could be added to by saying members should practice lawfully, safely, effectively, accountably, and fairly. Some might think that that's already wrapped up in the phrase, the best interests of the client, and you don't need to spell it out. Others might think, well, that sentence actually is really useful to spell it out, and it's best to have both. Some might prefer just the second sentence, feeling that the first one doesn't add anything. So those are the kinds of questions that are raised by the draft code, and the kinds of things on which we will be seeking people's views. As I say, if you have thoughts, please do put them in the chat, or you can email them in later on to Emma, Catherine, or Fiona. Next slide, please. Right, the second main heading was professional competence and accountability. That's a chunky one. There's so much, obviously, that you could say about that, and we're not going to cover it all today in any means at all. It's got subsections: scope of practice, supervision, clinical judgment, maintaining and developing knowledge and skills, and safeguarding, or adult and child protection. We're just going to focus on 2 of those. Next slide, please. Scope of practice and supervision. Those are the ones that we're going to focus on now, and going to invite you to join smaller discussion breakout groups, and you'll have the text of those subsections on your screen in the groups. Actually, we'll have a look at them in a moment anyway. You can talk about scope of practice or supervision, both, totally up to you. And the questions to ask are, well, does this draft make sense? And what, if anything, would you change and why? If you don't have the text on your screen in the breakout room, if the technology doesn't work, or if you don't want to work from it, then please just discuss what you think a code of ethics should say about scope of practice or supervision. Let's just have a quick look, if we can at the moment, please, Ben, at the text of the draft as it is. There we are. Thank you. So as you can see on the left, we've got the section head, professional competence and accountability, subsection, scope of practice or supervision, and then there's some draft wording. for the scope of practice, the draft wording that we put in there is in fact taken from the Health and Care Professions Council draft revised code. But we don't have to use that. It needs to work for us. Supervision, again, there's draft text there. And as I say, the questions are, does this make sense? And what, if anything, would you change and why? Next slide, please, Ben. That's it, thank you. So please, when you're in your rooms, choose a spokesperson to feedback. We'll come back into the main room after, I think, 25 minutes. And Catherine will gather the feedback from the groups. If you want to feedback your own thoughts after today, then please do so. It's not a test, and comment is welcome, obviously. If there are any immediate questions about what we're doing now, if I've not been clear, then I hope that somebody will see someone raise a hand, or it will go in the chat or something like that.
I think Fiona's got a hand up.
Fiona.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. I wonder if it's just worth you reading out the text of those, because it's short enough, those two parts, because I think some of us take it in better if we hear it maybe as well as seeing it on screen. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So scope of practice, draft wording. Members must only practice in the areas where they have the appropriate knowledge, skills, and experience to meet the needs of a service user safely and effectively. So I'll just stop myself there. Service user. Do we like that phrase? Would people prefer to say client or any other phrase? So, you can stop and pick it all apart and say, don't feel comfortable with that wording. I think it should say something different. Next bit, members must undertake additional training to update their knowledge, skills, and experience if they wish to widen their scope of practice. Members must refer a service user to an appropriate practitioner if the care, treatment, or other services they need are beyond the member's scope of practice. I'm sure you can all see that the basic point here is that we only work where we have the relevant skills, experience, knowledge, judgment to work effectively with people. And that if we want to work with a different group or with a different set of needs, then we take the steps necessary to equip ourselves to do that. And that we are able to recognize if something is actually beyond our expertise and are willing and able to refer the client or the service user to somebody who can help them more appropriately. So that's what that's sort of aiming at. And supervision 1, members must have adequate formal processes of support, reflection, learning and development to ensure quality services and structured ongoing personal development. And as you can see, it doesn't specify, oh, you've got to have this many hours per month from this person of seniority. This isn't the place for that kind of specific information. It's about a general statement of principle. And are you happy to sign up to that? Does that make sense? Would you change it? So those are the two areas that we'd be grateful for you to discuss in your breakout rooms. And then we'll come back into the main room. Thank you, Ben.
Well done to everybody who's still here. I think are we all back in now, Ben? Are all the groups closed? Brilliant. Okay, good. So, how was that for people generally? Thumbs up if it was an interesting discussion. Thumbs down if it was dull as ditch water. I can see mostly thumbs up. Mostly thumbs up. That's good. Brilliant. Good. So it would be good to get some feedback from the different groups. So is there a group who's nominated a spokesperson who would like to go first? If you can raise a virtual hand, I'm hoping that will move you to the top of my screen, because at the moment I can't see everybody all at once. So yes, Sue Jeffries has got a hand up. Thank you very much, Sue. Do you want to just give us an overview of what your team concluded?
Yeah, I hope people can chip in if I've not represented them correctly. But I think we're working for a range of organisations, but we're not within a big organisation like the NHS or something like that. And I think we felt some of the comments seem to be assuming people might be working in quite a large organisation of some sort in terms of requiring that the formal, adequate supervision, etc. Assuming there's a structure there that you can link into, which may not be the case if you're working in a small charity or a KEC or something like that. So we were wondering about how formal is, how adequate is. We're thinking we might need some definition of that. And in terms of supervision as well. So would it be a requirement on a freelancer to say have to buy supervision, if they didn't get it within from their employer? So just raising that. What was we? Oh yes, the issues about also thinking about, depending on which sort of user groups you're working with, they're going to raise probably quite different issues about the amount of support and supervision you might need, if that makes sense. So some might be a lot simpler to deal with, but if you're working in a secure unit with people with quite acute mental health problems, then you're probably going to need more. So it was just thinking about that. And in terms of the CPD, about people needing more, maybe having to seek more training, if they're going beyond. I don't know if it's relevant to this section, but generally with most professional bodies, ongoing CPD is a requirement for everybody. Most require at least 30 hours a year. Just to keep it in, up with your profession, whether you're going into a different sort of area of it or not, you'd generally be expected to do at least 30 hours and provide some sort of report and reflection on that every year. And just finally, just on the referring people on, we thought that might be a bit of a big ask to know exactly what was going on in your area, to then be able to refer somebody on if you weren't the appropriate person.
Some good points there. Brilliant. There's various other hands up. Have you got additional points to add to that? If it's the same points, then just say that briefly. I'm just going to make sure we get round everybody. So Alison, you're next on my screen.
Thank you very much. We also talked about supervision. We didn't actually get to talk about the other thing. Very similar points to what Zoe has just said, making it clear that we certainly agreed with the supervision definition that was on the screen, but didn't feel that really captured the sort of element of supervision that perhaps is used in other medical or counselling professions, where it's significantly about the well-being of the practitioner as well as delivering a quality service for clients. So and again, the idea of how many contact hours or how does that work would vary very much, both across the client groups you're working in, exactly as Sue said, but also the individual. Different people have different personal capacities and in order for dealing with that sort of thing. So the question about how much is enough and how does that work, one of our Glenville observed that it also, that supervision for the well-being of the practitioner does not have to be the sort of one-to-one with a more senior or more experienced person offloading. It could be simply peer support. So some of it rolled into some of the CPD, where you're just meeting and talking and learning and sharing experiences with other peers, also bundles into that sense of supervision around well-being. And there was also, we did discuss a bit about how to ensure quality services, and that's quite difficult. Mention was made of things like gathering 360 feedback from service users or clients for practitioners, and somehow debriefing that or reviewing that with a with somebody, a supervisor. But again, if you're talking about individuals freelancing, back to that one again, if you're not in a big organization, you don't have a sort of, it's almost like a line manager thing. We're talking about, what your needs are, what your training needs are, how well you're doing, what went and what didn't go particularly well. And I think for a lot of us are freelance, and also raise the question about somebody has to pay, you have to pay people to do this. So whether the register of practitioners may also identify some of those people with appropriate skills, training, experience, and capacity and willingness to be supervisors. but quite how the money would work was, you know, TBD.
Yeah, I think
Anybody else think I've missed anything out, guys?
But once you start to peel off the layers, that there's more layers of complexity that sit beneath as you answer one question and another 5 questions that come to mind. So it's useful to start to get those thoughts coming through.
Okay. One last point I've written down here. One of our members, Zoe, has experience of the Hong Kong STH Association, and they have a supervision process. I don't know whether Christina and co, you looked at that as a model, but it sounded like they had quite some, you know, that was quite a comprehensive processes there. So if you haven't looked at what Hong Kong does, then that might you know, help as well defining this.
Great, thank you. That's good. Yeah, I know we've got some links there, so that's great. Thank you, Alison. Liz Ingram, you're next on the screen.
Thank you. We talked as a group quite a lot about working with people with mental health support needs, and found this to be an area it's difficult, isn't it? Because as STH workers, I mean, I'm actually, this isn't a brag, it's just saying that I'm quite well qualified. I have done the MSc through Coventry. So I think I'm quite well qualified, and yet I work at the Centre for Ecotherapy, where we do a lot of work with people with mental health support needs, and yet I work with a lot of people whose experience and whose diagnosis and everything are complex. And for me to try and hold those different needs and energies and the dynamic in the group is very, very hard. And mostly we do well and we help, you know, support people's well-being, and sometimes we don't, and sometimes there are clients who are very difficult. One thing we have in place is that we always get referrals that give us, we've got a form that we designed ourselves that gives us contact details for the person's, any client's GP, their mental health support worker, or whoever their mental health professional has been. I mean, quite often they're being passed away from services to try and, you know, give people a step to go on to working with us, say. And I feel personally very, very alone in this. I feel I've got a lot of training. I've done a certain amount of CPD through local training opportunities here, but I still feel very underqualified. And I wonder if it's something as a profession we're going to have to really look at, that although I keep coming back to, I work with nature, I work with horticulture, I work with ecotherapy, or however you want to put it, people with mental health support needs need to be met on that level as well, don't they? And yet there's this sort of gap. We can say till we're blue in the face, I am not a therapist, I'm not a counsellor, I'm not a mental health professional. But if I'm working with those people, somehow I've got to support them with more knowledge than there seems to be training out there to give me. I'm not putting that well at all.
So I think I get what you're saying. That it needs to be, if we're going to put these things into the code, then we've got to back it up as an association with how we will support people to meet the items in the code, whether that's through, you know, guidance or CPD or more formal training. So those are the bits we're going to need to flow through.
But at the minute, I don't think the training is there, and I'm not sure how we align ourselves. It might be that we need to align ourselves with psychologists, psychotherapists, or whatever within our sessions. But then again, it's very, very difficult if you are a freelance person, you know. But yeah, I think that's the main points.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Who's up next? Katie Andrews.
Hi, we looked at the first 2 points, so about the training element predominantly, and it's interesting because we had someone that had training from the States, someone with a diploma, and someone with hands-on work experience in the field. So we all came from completely different perspectives, and that, I suppose one of the questions was, well, how would you be able to equate that to what's appropriate level? And also in the diploma, it's very much discussed that you're meeting a person, as Liz was saying, you're meeting the person as an individual in the horticulture STH setting, and really you're working on their interests and abilities and focus. So each person and each individual really is so individual that it's almost like you've got to kind of take away what their, not think about what their needs are, but more about their abilities. And the diploma also discusses a lot about how when you've done that when you've done the diploma, you should be able to go into most fields. But we all agreed that, you know, then there are certain areas that do need specific training. So very similar to Liz, really. Yeah, I think that was that's the main points, but I don't know if anyone could add to them. Was there anything else on supervision?
Anybody want to add to what Katie's said from that group?
Just following on, it's supporting what everyone else was saying, really, as well. Yeah, just in a small charity or an organisation, I work at Twigs with Alan. It would be amazing to be able to have the time and the funding to have those moments of formal supervision, but because it's a small organisation and there's not enough time and there's not enough money, it happens informally all the time. It's a wonderful environment, but formally it doesn't. And yeah, in terms of an umbrella of an organisation, I think it would be hugely beneficial.
Yeah, I think that how we can draw out the good bits from the informal and wrap a formal process so it's recognised rather than it being purely adding burdens, I think is going to be quite a key thing for us to work through. So thank you for that. Good. Is that you done, Katie? Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to Sally Hamill, please.
Hi. We focused a bit more on the definition aspects of the what was written up there, and kind of just took a look at those and discussed whether we felt they were reasonable in the context we worked in and understood. So we were taking a slightly different approach perhaps to some of the discussions that have been relayed. So we were saying that we had some reservations about the wording of it. So where we were saying, for example, that members must undertake additional training, we were saying, well, should that actually be should? And we might want to change that wording slightly to say that they need to undertake that training to update their skills and experience in order to widen their scope of practice. So it's not necessarily a situation where it's mandated. And the other thing we said was that perhaps we need to clarify actually whether there is a mandatory requirement to maintain existing skills. So you've got two facets to this. One is where you should undertake more training if you want to widen your scope of practice, and one where you must maintain your existing skills to maintain your registration status. Hopefully that what I've just said made sense.
Yeah, that's good points. I'm assuming that Christina will be all over the must and the should. I don't know where she's gone on my screen at the moment. I can't see if she's nodding or not. Yes, she's there.
Yeah. We weren't really comfortable with this terminology of service user. We felt that was a bit too formal, and perhaps that needed a bit more looking at, and it wasn't always appropriate in every context that people work in. You need a definition for the glossary. So, and we had a suggestion there that would be a recipient of STH, but we're not saying that should be the answer, but just as an example. And the final point that we had was that members, it said about the point about referring clients to appropriate practitioners. We said that members should seek to refer their client to an appropriate practitioner if their care, treatment or services requirement exceeded that member's capabilities, because we felt that depending on your working context, you may not have that available to you, so you couldn't necessarily enforce that as a requirement.
That's another good point. Yeah, thank you.
And that on that very last one, which was we ran a bit out of time for supervision, but what we did sort of come to a consensus on was we felt you couldn't be sure of delivering quality services given people's different levels of supervision and support that they had available to them. So it might need a reworking there to revise it from ensure to just. Okay. You can't write that as a statement with confidence, probably, and it doesn't sound like it to me listening to what other people have been saying.
Great.
So it might be to endeavour to provide, or just changing that
Yeah.
wording rather than sort of, it's almost you're trying to mandate it, but it may not be that we have the circumstances in place to do that.
Mhm. Okay, right. We'll have to take some soundings on some of these different wordings, I think, in terms of what they do really
So
mean.
if that would be helpful, I could just, I'll email this back to our summary back, because I took notes while we were.
That would be hugely helpful if you could email that to whoever's email address you've got, Emma, me, Christina, Fiona,
Okay.
and we'll make sure it gets to the
Yeah,
right.
that was sort of a summarization of what I wrote, but I can certainly make that a little clearer and send that.
Same goes for others. If you've got some other points that you want to make sure get over, then do drop it on an email to us to make sure that we do get it. Thank you. Okay.
Can I just add something back in? I'm so sorry that I forgot to say when I was reporting back for our group, because I got caught up on the mental health completely. But there was a general feeling that perhaps we need to define the area that anyone is trained specifically in, so that it shows you have expertise in that particular area. If you're working with people with dementia or people with physical disability, that you need to be able to show that you've got training in that specific.
And I think on the register, it'll give us scope to say if somebody has a particular area of specialism, and we'll have to define what constitutes you having that sufficient specialist knowledge. So it's another area that needs defining and pinning down. But yes, I think it's important to be clear where somebody does have that. Thank you, Liz. Right, where have we got to? I think we're on to Claire Farley. There she is. Hi, Claire.
So we also picked up on the point about referring, must refer, and we felt it should only say seek, or maybe even give people the option to say, I'm sorry, but I don't know. Like, you need to go back to the association, or you need to go back to Thrive or Trellis and, have another search or something. Be honest about what we can't do. And not be forced to do something that, as we said, we don't feel we can do, referring people. We did also briefly cover the issue of whether we call them service users. Somebody raised the idea that apparently in their Hertfordshire area, I think it was, the word service users going out of fashion, and they're using person using the service. We talked about the word client, maybe. And then somebody also raised the idea that actually, have we done any consultation with actual clients to find out what they'd actually like to be called, and that seemed a really sensible thing to try, with a range of different clients in different areas, to find out what they'd like to be called, perhaps whether there's any preferences amongst our service users. We also picked up on the word practitioner, as maybe that's a good word for us rather than members, because people were talking about members as sometimes actually the people who are our clients. Just in case that's getting a bit complicated. And then as regarding the supervision, we were questioning whether, if you are working in an organisation and you have a manager and you have a one-to-one, does that count as supervision, or is that something else separately? Does it need to be beyond your organisation? And then whether a supervisor needs to be a specifically accredited type of person, whether we need to be able to supervise within our own STH body, or should we be doing supervision with people outside our body? These are all questions, I'm afraid, rather than answers. And then do other bodies, like the ones we're sort of emulating, do they have guidelines about how supervision should work, and what do their guidelines say? Whether it should be an internal or organised process, or whether it should be a process with people who are external to our organisations.
Yeah.
And then we were also talking, somebody also raised the issue about what happens in a crisis situation. So you might have got organised that your process is that you have a peer group once a month, but what happens in a crisis that you need support, on that day, or something at the end of the day when you've had a particularly tricky time, not just the regular supervision, as I said, but in a crisis situation, how do we sort that? So sorry, that's more questions than answers.
Yeah, that's in progress. That's good. I've got an echo on here, so I hope it's not just me. It's a really good list of questions, actually, Claire. Thank you to Claire and that group. Yeah, certainly the word supervision definitely is one that we need to be really clear on, and how that is different in this context in terms of professional practice supervision rather than line management supervision, and how we define who is suitable to be a supervisor, what makes them. Do they need some extra level of qualification or demonstrated experience to meet that criteria? So yeah, lots more for us to work through and to come back to you guys on with thoughts and suggestions. Good. Where are we down to? I think Fiona, you're next on my screen, I think.
Yeah,
we had got their hands.
We had similar discussions about the must refer on to in our group, and suggested the alternative wording like endeavour or trying to find alternative support. So that was all in very consistent with the other discussions. We also wondered if there needed to be an extra clause there about bouncing back inappropriate referrals that you maybe can't take on because they seem to be beyond your scope of competence. So something about recruitment or initial referral process there. The same questions about adequacy and formality of supervision and the definition of that, and we wondered if that needed to be in a separate code of practice where the detail really comes in. But again, even if we do define that further, we could imagine there being some anxieties about that, given all the discussions about it being very different in different settings, large, small organizations, health versus prison versus other care settings. And we had a former nurse who was saying that supervision was a nightmare for years because there was never the money, there was never the trained personnel, and it was difficult to find the time to release people for supervision. So it was a requirement, but at the same time it was really an extra pressure and a stress, which is a bit ironic. So I think often we've thought we want to avoid creating a professional association that begins to import some of the more toxic aspects that we hear a lot about in the NHS and the care systems. So that's a very interesting point for us to keep in mind always, I think, to try and avoid those difficult situations that we see in other professions that are established. And we wondered maybe having just the wording, having access to formal supervision might be more appropriate rather than what the wording that's there. But then I was concerned that this might let managers and senior staff off the hook, because they could say, oh, you've got access anytime you want, my door's open, but then it's not really. So that maybe leaves people unprotected because don't have that formal right or expectation to that. And we wanted a definition somewhere about what supervision meant. So that kind of very specific sense of it in the therapeutic world, where it's about the practitioner's well-being as well as dealing with cases, looking at how you're dealing with cases or people or groups that you're maybe unsure about or maybe want to discuss with a more experienced person, and not just straightforward workplace supervision, which is, are you coming in on time? Are you selling enough of whatever? So it needs to be defined because it is a very specific form of supervision, and different from appraisal and the whole kind of so there's the learning and development mentioned, and then personal development, which is all great and should come into that scope sometimes, but supervision is something very special that we mean. We had those same discussions about, do freelancers have to buy in just as counsellors do when they're training, and buying in supervision, and the worry that the profession may not have people with the right skills yet or the right experience, enough of them to provide supervision for everyone who wants to practice. And so what are the alternative routes? Who else do we think people might go to find this service meanwhile as we grow? And then I got worried that we were getting bogged down in all this text and all these formal definitions, that it was all becoming very dry when the professional association sounded like something quite exciting. But someone very kindly said, well, this is going to bring such a rich understanding. It's going to be an enriching process, and it is interesting. So I felt hard to define that. And we did hear that from some of the other bodies we spoke to, the rehab physios, who've been through this process already, and they said it was a hugely developmental process and they found it really positive. So to anyone who's feeling a bit jaded and put off by all the terminology tonight, bear that in mind. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Fiona. That's a really good note to leave us on, because it can be a total minefield, and we can make it very turgid, or we can use it as a way of elevating our profile and learning from others so that we can improve what we do ourselves. So brilliant. I'm really conscious that we're pretty close to running out of time. I think you've all done brilliantly well to still be here. I'm glad we haven't really lost hardly anybody at all. Are there any last questions or thoughts that people have got burning desire to share before we do wrap up? No, can't see any hands coming up or hear anybody shouting. So I think really I just need to say, just checking what was on my things. First, most important thing is we will get this recording edited and we'll get it up on the Trellis website as quickly as we can get through that. They have got their conference next week, so I know they're going to be somewhat busy. So it won't be immediate, but we'll get it up there as quickly as we possibly can. So that page on the Trellis website is sort of your go-to place to find out what's going on. We'll put the frequently asked questions up there. So we have been making notes and we've got the stuff in the chat about the bits that are coming up. So Christina and others will be working on sort of the next draft of the code and working through all different areas. If people would like to work with Christina and a wider group on refining some of that, then do please make yourself known to us and we'll be very happy to have your inputs. The next meeting we've put in the diary for the 12th of December. So I hope that people can make that one. We'll get Zoom links and agenda sent out as far in advance as we can for people on that, but it's likely that we're going to move on to looking at how we define the role or roles that we want to be part of this register. So is it just STH practitioner, or is it different levels, different types of STH practitioner, and what the register requires from us in terms of defining those roles? So that's the sort of the next bit we know is going to be quite a difficult one to get through. So we'll try and come to you with some proposals and suggestions that we can then kick around in groups and have a look and get your views on and get your thoughts on to see where we're going with that bit. So I think that was all from me. The bit I forgot to mention earlier on, I think I did say last time that we were putting in a fairly substantial funding bid, which we were all quite excited about. And very sadly, they turned us down, as is the one on a lot of funders. So sadly, we don't have a big fat pot of funding, but we are continuing to look for possible funders to support this area of work so that we can get some additional resources in, particularly some legal support around governance side of things, which we know are going to be quite tricky, particularly as we're trying to set up a UK association that needs to work across in Scotland and England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and meet all the different legal requirements there. So there are some quite thorny things for us to work through, as well as things like the code of ethics and defining the role of STH practitioner and such like, which sounds simple, but as you've just discovered are anything but simple. So please keep with us. Please come forward if you've got some time, or particularly if you know anybody with legal training or anything else that might want to work with us. We would love to hear from them. The more the merrier, really.